Welcome to the Grey Matter podcast. We set up this podcast to have deep conversations with people who are thriving on the outside. We're here to learn about the stuff in their grey matter. And we're here for the grey area stories. We're here to humanize the pursuit of success, performance, health span, and well-being. Let's try to unearth what we actually want and what actually matters to us. Dr. Shireen Henry is a trained medical doctor with a focused interest in longevity science, metabolic health, and evidence-based performance optimization. She integrates clinical insight with advanced recovery and regenerative modalities to help individuals build physiological resilience and sustainable vitality. At Matter, she advocates a personalized, systems-based approach to well-being, combining movement strategy, metabolic optimization, nervous system regulation, and high-impact therapies like hyperbaric oxygen therapy, red light therapy, and contrast recovery. Her work is centered on translating complex science into clear, practical action, empowering individuals, particularly women in midlife, to strengthen their biology, restore energy, and operate at a higher level of function. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Shireen.
Hiya.
Thanks so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So it's been really cool working with you for the last couple of months.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I talk to the people around here, what we see is this strong, confident, well put together, like really has her shit together woman.
I'm glad that's what it seems on the outside.
You seem really good at like pretending.
Mastered it.
So I'm trying to figure out, where did that come from? What is the story beneath it?
Oh, there's a story. There always is, right? I grew up in a dichotomous environment. I'm South African. My parents are South African. So I grew up during apartheid. So it was, that whole life experience. And at the same time, my dad was a professional cricket player. And he was recruited to the UK because at the time, international sport was banned in South Africa. It meant that we spent 6 months of the year in South Africa, and the other 6 months we were in the UK. And it created an environment where in the UK, we didn't experience blatant racism. And then the 6 months that we were back in South Africa, there were all these restrictions. Because of the color of your skin, you couldn't go to certain malls, you couldn't go to certain beaches, you couldn't go to certain schools. You had to live in certain neighborhoods. So all the black people in the country, black Africans, would live in one community. All the colored people, which is what I am classified as, mixed race, would live in one community, and the white Caucasian population would live in another. And so it was a very weird childhood, coming to terms with that, when 6 months of the year you're free to do whatever you want, and then you come back home. And I remember like going to the supermarket, this mall, with my mum, and not understanding like why we had to go there and not why we couldn't just go anywhere else, right? Because that was the mall that colored people could go to. So it was, but you know, having those experiences also changed the way both my sister and I viewed the world, because we'd expanded our experiences beyond South Africa, right? Beyond.
Yeah, from a young age, you got that exposure, right?
And so with that came judgment as well, because when we returned to South Africa and spending 6 months of the year abroad in the UK, when I was born in Scotland, we had an accent. I'm still told that I have an accent. So when
It's a great accent.
So when we returned, you know, we were called all these names. You know, why do you speak like that? Are you trying to be white? We were called coconuts.
Is that derogatory?
And yeah, it was derogatory at the time, for sure. It meant that you were brown on the outside, but you wanted to be white because you acted a certain way, you spoke like the white, you know, community or people. And it was mind-blowing to us because it wasn't really something that we were deliberately doing.
It was just your life.
Correct.
Yeah.
And, you know, the people in our community where we lived didn't necessarily understand it because they didn't have the same experiences that we had. And because of that, we also had conversations and questions around, but why? You know, how can this be? Like after experiencing the UK and then coming back to this. So yeah, I'm grateful for it. It was certainly not easy. But yeah, our parents, we've always had very open relationships with both with my mum and my dad. And so these would be dinner time conversations, right? My dad had experienced that in his career as well. So it was very much a living experience for the entire family. So yeah, and then from there, from a young age, I always knew that I wanted to be a doctor. There wasn't anything else. I had this interest in medicine and in law and business as well. And I remember just having this like inner calling, like this is what I wanted to do.
Was it about helping people?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah. It was definitely about wanting to help people in a way that could make their lives better. And so, I went through primary school, through high school, and played sport, was very involved, but I wasn't a full straight A student. And so I knew that, and I knew that going through high school, well, there was a couple of challenges, right? One, I was colored, and that also meant that the percentage of colored students who got entry into universities at the time was far lower than the white Caucasian population.
It was restricted.
Not necessarily restricted, but because when you're coming from a so-called, or I don't call it so-called because it is what it is, right? Disadvantaged community, you don't have access to the same resources. You don't have access to necessarily the same education that the other generations have had. So there's a inequality, right, that exists. So I kind of knew that, that was one hurdle that I needed to overcome. The other was that, med schools anywhere in the world, you're kind of, they're looking for the cream of the crop, right? They want the top achievers, well-rounded individuals, etc., ideally. And back then, I would say historically, the focus was really more on academics.
Academics, yeah.
As I would say, universities kind of moved with the times, it became more about trying to find a more holistic approach, like a well-rounded individual, right? But your academics plays a huge part in your application. And, I wasn't a full straight A student because I had other shit going on.
Boys.
And no, I went to an all-girls school, so there were no boys. I can't even blame it on that. But I also knew that I needed to do something different to be able to set myself apart when that time came for application processes. So at the age of 18, my mum worked at one of the banks at the time, and one of her clients worked at the local police department where they would do, in the forensics department where they would do post-mortems. And she told him that I want to study medicine. And he said, well, he can suggest, he'll speak to the professor that does it, and maybe I can come and they can teach me and I can learn about the human body in this forensic pathology environment.
With the police?
Correct. So at the age...
At 18?
16.
At 16?
At 16.
This is crazy.
Yeah. So my mum set that up for me. And
so what did you have
so I would miss school on, I think it was a Tuesday or Wednesday morning. And I would go down to the police station and I would meet this inspector, Dan Bradar, and the professor who did the postmortems. He's actually, I forget his, I think it's Schwartz, if I'm not mistaken. But that was my first encounter. And it was a pretty morbid encounter for the first time.
Yeah, it's a pretty intense first time.
Oh, 100%. I mean, at that point, I don't even think I had actually ever touched, a dead body or come that close to it. And now we're in a scenario where these are postmortems that you're doing for unnatural deaths, right? So, but I loved the learning of it. It was fascinating for me. And so that carried on. Fast forward a couple of years, I had to apply to med school. My mum was working at the university at the time. I applied to, I think, 3 different universities, got rejected. And I was like, fuck this. I'm not gonna take it lying down. This is what I want to do, so I'm gonna fight for it. So I appealed, and my appeal was accepted in the sense that I was given the opportunity to stand in front of a panel and state my case. Why me? What do I have that's different to all the other cream of the crop students, and why should they sort of take a chance? And I'll never forget that day. I was so nervous. And it's just like, I'm finishing high school. I don't have a backup plan, right? It's this or nothing. And I went into this interview standing in front of these panel of people that I have no idea. They don't know me. I don't know them. And I remember going in and saying, you know what, I honestly believe I don't think it's all about your marks. Like, what you scored in math. Yes, it's important, but I don't believe that is everything. There's more to it. I think, it comes down to a calling. It also comes down to your willingness to see things through and fight for what you really want. And that's why I'm here, because I'm fighting for it. And all I'm asking you is to give me a chance. I will, guarantee that I won't let you down, but I need the chance. And at that point, I went through, I was like captain of my hockey team. I was on all of these committees. I was at high school. I was a prefect at high school. So, all of these other things that kind of shaped my experiences is what I wove into my story of like, yeah, I know I'm not a straight A student, but here's all the other things that make me me and why I deserve a second chance. And, you kind of like, I walked out there unsure what was going to happen, but I just had to have the faith that whatever was going to unfold was going to be. And I'd grown up with my dad in particular always saying that whatever's meant for you is going to come your way. And if it's not meant for you, then it's not meant for you. So I had to have faith in that. And I think it was about a week later, I got a call to come down to the university. And I went down to meet this lady. And she called me into her office. My mum was there with me. And she said, I have news for you. We've made a decision. I'm waiting in anticipation. And she says, we've agreed to give you a second chance.
Wow.
And to let you in. So we've accepted your appeal. But I'm telling you, just don't mess this up. And, it's like one of those things where I can play it out as if it was happening in real time right now. Those words of just don't mess it up. So there was this weight going into med school of like, you can't fuck this up, right? But it was a powerful driver as well. And
what an important moment.
Yeah, and a learning experience, right?
In life.
Yeah, like also just, the world can throw shit at you, but it's how you respond and what you do about it. And what can you do that's in your control? Like that was a very early lesson for me.
How did you know that it was time to fight for your place? I understand that inside you felt this was your calling and you didn't want to give up on it. But I'm assuming you were like 18, 19 years old.
Yeah, 17,
17, 18.
Yeah.
How did you know that that was even an option to fight?
You mean like go through the appeal process?
Yeah. And to go state your case at
Well, so part of so my mom was working at the university at the time. And when I got that rejection letter, I was devastated.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what can I do? Like, what now, right? Then there was an option of, well, you can go and do like a BSc degree, and then you can try and convert in. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. And my mom said, well, then you have the option of appealing. And so that's the route that we took, right? Because like I said, there was no backup plan that I truly felt I wanted to do.
Yeah, but what a good lesson to learn at that age too, right? That if things don't go your way, yes, you do want to listen if something is not meant for you, but if you have a gut instinct that this is something you want to do, there are usually options.
Yep.
And you have room to fight almost always.
Yep.
If you're willing to.
If you're willing to, yeah. Doesn't mean that if that particular door has closed, you got to find the one that's going to open up for you. Like, and that's sort of like, if I have to think back on everything that has happened in my life, it's been like that. there's back home, there was always this assumption that because my dad is pretty well known in South Africa because of his sporting career and he's sort of, popular figure, that our life was easy and that we had it all, and that we came from this very privileged family. But it was not the case. My dad didn't believe in giving us everything that we wanted. My first job was at the age of, I think, 12, 11. I was delivering newspapers with my sister at 5 a.m. in the morning before school. That was 7 days a week, right? Went through med school, holding 3 different jobs at the same time. But through that, there are the life lessons that you learn along the way. And I think with everything that was placed in front of me, it slowly built my resilience up over time, because it's only through that adversity and being able to come out on the other side that you build that capacity of resilience, right?
Yeah, I'm in two minds about this now as someone with kids, and you've a kid as well. I have the instinct on both sides where I do agree that hardship is important and learning to overcome and learning to endure and learning to persevere are all really important things. But at the same time, it can be taken too far where it becomes something detrimental. And I find it very difficult to find my bearings personally on that. For myself and for my kids, I have a history of taking it a little bit too far, as in over-indexing on my ability to keep going.
Yeah.
And it's bitten me in the ass in the past. So that's why I'm kind of aware of it. But I 100% agree with you. If we don't expose ourselves from a young age to some sort of hardship, whether through sport or through having to do early mornings or having to fight for something that you want, not knowing whether or not it's going to go through, all those formative in such a deep way. And I think it's kind of easy to see. It's kind of easy to see with the people that you work with later in life. If you work with ex-athletes, they tend to be able to keep going. They tend to be very good at what is the mission, what is the goal.
Very disciplined as well, right?
Let's go. Yeah. And if you work with people that have been to medical school, or, we'll talk about your experience in Kazakhstan later. When people have gone through a certain amount of pressure, they don't get phased
by the little shit anymore.
Yeah, by the little shit, by the longer hours, by the whatever, right? It's just part of life, and it's this capacity that we build.
Yeah.
And by the way, quick aside, you know how you got coconut? I got banana. Yellow on the outside, white on the inside. Because my father grew up spent a lot of time in Australia. My mom spent a lot of time in England, and so I was raised in a household where there was no Chinese, and my mom was quite she wanted us to speak a certain way.
Yeah.
And so when I went to school in primary school, I had no idea what was going on during Chinese class, and all the kids were making fun of me because I spoke funny. Yeah. So I got banana.
So you
were just coconut and banana is what we'll call this podcast.
It'll be a fruit mix. How's that? I will say, as time progressed, when Oreos eventually made its way to South Africa, it was then you went from a coconut to an Oreo. As times evolved and Oreos then became a thing. But yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. So you can relate to that for sure.
A little bit. I definitely didn't get anything even close to what you got in terms of that type of racial pressure. But yeah, I just thought the fruit thing was funny. So how did you go from there in med school and your early time as a doctor in South Africa? How the hell did you end up here? Or what was in the middle?
So what happened in the middle was I got married, and then there was some family shifts and dynamics that were going on. And I then became a trailing spouse. So that's what initially, leaving South Africa was intended to be maybe a year, maybe 2. But then it's sort of solidified, and coming to Singapore, I was a trailing spouse, which is a term That's been around since like, I believe 1981. And what it really means is, as a spouse, you sort of give up your career in pursuit of following your spouse's career to another country or job to another country where you're planning to kind of like build this life and support their career progression. So that's ultimately what brought me to Singapore.
Were you willing and happy to make that sacrifice?
Yes. Yeah. At the time, it was a decision of like, what's best for the family? What does this opportunity mean, for him, for us as a family? What would our son be exposed to? Of course, there's downsides of all of it, because on the one hand, as a parent, you want to give your child the best that you can, right? And, that played into the decision-making as well. Plus, the job opportunity that he had was amazing. It was such a great career opportunity for him. And I was like, you have to take it. Like, this is one of those things where this has landed on your lap now and you have to run with it. And
I do like those moments. You have to decide to choose adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I knew that it would mean me having to like find my way. What do I do? How am I going to do it?
And so you went from there to Singapore, from South Africa to Singapore?
No, so we actually went to Indonesia first.
Right.
We were in Indonesia for 4 years, but it was working like for this oil and gas company, but as a contractor. And then it transitioned to employment directly with a company. And then that's what brought us here to Singapore.
Right.
But yeah, the life of leaving family, friends behind and that identity, and then, coming to a place that you don't know, you don't have any social connections. You've got to find your feet. We were a young family at that point. My son was 2 at the time. It's trying to find your way through it all. So you've got, the family life. You've got this new environment that you're in, culturally as well. And then you've got your own identity as a professional, right? Like, what does this mean for me?
I'm assuming it starts as general excitement for a new adventure, but then quickly becomes like, oh shit, there's all this stuff that I have to deal with now.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
And what else am I missing besides being away from family, not having a social circle, having to find schools, like all these things?
Yeah.
Like what was the big one that sort of...
I think for me, the professional side of things did, because on the one hand, you're like, all right, I knew what I fought for. Like I had to fight to get into medical school, right? It was 6 years of grafting. And I graduated, I had this vision of what I wanted to be, right? I wanted to specialize. I wanted to do that. And I had this very, in my mind, I believe, like linear track of how I saw things playing out.
Yep.
And it certainly didn't play out that way. It was more like a jungle gym. You're trying to figure out which one to grab onto. But it was the challenge of now, being in an environment where, your medical license is not recognized. So you kind of have to, you're working. So a lot of my work in the beginning was actually outside of Singapore. How do you take your situation? And I always say to my friends, like, life's going to hand you lemons at some point in time. You have to take those lemons and fucking make a great tasting lemonade, right? And so it was like, all right, so this is my situation. Like, what can I do? How am I going to shift this to figure out what I can do and make it meaningful and impactful?
I think that's such an important lesson as well. The lemons lemonade thing. I think you're right. Like life will just throw things at us, and there are things that we can't control and there are things that we can control. And usually what we can control is our relationship to the thing that has changed.
Yep.
And I wish someone had taught me that earlier, because it's not going to go your way. Even if you do everything right, like we tend to do in Singapore. You go step by step
Yeah.
to the right schools, to the right jobs.
So
for
it's that
exa-
linear track, right?
For exactly
Yep.
the right amount of time, you tend to get to places where you're like, fuck, like this ain't it. Like, what's going on now?
Yeah.
It's the skill of learning to adjust your relationship with the change is huge.
But it's a process, right? It's I feel like, I oftentimes like hear my parents' voice in my head, like when I'm going through stuff, like the stuff that they would say to us, like as we were growing up, at that time, you don't give it a lot of weight because you don't fully understand
Haven't
it, right?
been through enough shit yet.
Correct. Then you go through enough shit and you're like, oh, that's what he was talking about.
Ever since parenthood, I'm like, oh, fuck, he's right.
She's so spot on there, right? Like,
Yeah. That must feel good at like 60 or 70 or whatever, when we tell them, like, I get it now. To wait 20 years for he finally paid on it.
the light bulb moment went, it went off. But I think despite that, even knowing or having the words said to you still doesn't translate to the how. How do I get through this? How do I develop the skills that I need to get through this process, right? And over time, I've learned through trial and error. And over time, I've also learned that you can't just, there's no expedited process, There's no expedited DHL delivery service on this one. You got to work through the shit. And it might be 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And other times, you might be making good headway and then there's another, thing that brings you back again. And so it's this constant journey.
Yeah, I find that one hard to accept. But when I look at kind of the biggest things that have happened in my life, it feels like I should draw the lesson that the fastest way is slow and steady.
Yeah.
But I think we grow up in societies where we want more, we want faster, and we don't even need to wait for food anymore.
No.
And I think that does something to us, right?
Absolutely.
But I'd be lying if I said I fully accepted that. But from the evidence that I've seen with the big decisions in my life, like slow and steady, like taking action, but slow and steady is the way to go with the change, right?
Yeah. But it's hard, for sure.
So then something brought you to Kazakhstan and something happened at COVID. Please tell us about that.
Oh, what a time. I think every person has a COVID story. I think COVID changed people's lives forever. But for me, in 2019, I took on a rotational role in Kazakhstan, and it was in the oil and gas industry as well. And initially, it was supposed to be a 28-day rotation. And so,
as medical director,
as a medical doctor,
as a medical
/ medical advisor for this company, it's the largest producer of oil in Kazakhstan, and the 28-day on-off rotation and just the new environment and was super exciting. And I had worked in oil and gas, so I kind of knew the system. I knew what was required, etc. So, but I was intrigued by the 28 days because I thought, shit, this is great. You work for 28 days and then after that you board a plane and you come home and then you're off for 28 days, right? I mean, it means you're only working like 6 months of the year. Like, who wouldn't want that? But then I got to my second hitch, which is what we call the time that you're on site working. And I remember my second hitch leaving here, and then the news, there was a little bit of news coming out about what was happening in China. There's this something's happening. Something's happening. We're not really sure, but there's this strange illness that's going around, and doctors are trying to figure out what this is. And my first rotation was an extended rotation because my back-to-back wasn't able to start yet. So on my second rotation, he was coming in. So there was going to be this overlap. And I reached Kazakhstan, and I remember picking him up one night, and I said to him, this was like the second day, I think, after he had landed, And I said to him,
Sorry, who is this?
this is my back-to-back,
Your
the other
back-to-back,
doctor,
yeah,
so who would work on the 28 days that I would be off. And, we're in this taxi and I said to him, have you read about this strange
Did you hear about this
thing
thing?
that's happening? And he said, yeah, I have, but, whatever. And I remember like sitting in the car, like just the discussion, like I had this uneasy feeling inside, but it was like, okay, maybe it's whatever. So now we're into the beginning of 2020, right? Because I started sort of the end of 2019. And it was on that second hitch that I got the call from home, from Singapore. It was a Friday afternoon. And at the time, over that period, over that hitch, things were starting to ramp up a little bit, right? And so the organization had started listening to, what was happening. They were like, look, I think we need to start preparing for if this is something bigger. And then, WHO was coming out with all of the information at the time.
Yeah, it was slow and then really fast.
Correct.
Yep.
Right? So in that time, we went from like starting with like, oh, there's a strange thing, to like towards the end being like, all right, I think we need to stand up like an emergency management team so that, if all of this goes to shit, we have some preparation going. And then I got the call on that Friday night to say, well, Singapore has made the decision that on the Sunday at midnight, they're closing the borders. And I remember thinking, okay, well, now I'm a little conflicted here because I've been called up to be the medical representative on this emergency management team. And at the same time, I'm supposed to go home at some point. My hitch isn't over yet, but the borders are going to close. And if I don't get back by that Sunday, like, what does that mean? It means
you don't see your son.
Yeah. Don't see my son, don't see my husband. Like, it's, where do I go then? Right? Like, where do I go? And I was looking at like possible flights. And there wasn't
From Kazakhstan.
into Singapore. And there wasn't any flights available that could get me in by the cutoff time anyways. And I was like, is that a sign? Like, I'm supposed to be here? But ultimately, the bigger pull was the fact that I'm a medical professional. Like, I took this Hippocratic oath. I am here to help people. And if I've been called up to take on this role as the medical lead in the response to this, then there's a duty that I need to uphold, right? At the time, I had no idea how things were going to obviously play out and the shit that was going to come after that. But that was sort of like my position. And so I couldn't get back in, borders closed in Singapore. Fast forward, to summarize, what ended up happening was I got stuck in Kazakhstan for, I think it was 8 months in 2020. And during that time, I had tried to get back, but you couldn't, because if you weren't a PR or if you weren't a citizen, you had to, PRs and citizens were given first preference to enter the country. So you had to go through this application process, and then you were quarantined. I spent a lot of time in quarantine. And it took 8 months. And I wrote letters to like people in the ministry saying, please, I'm on the front line. My family's here. I just want to be able to come home so I didn't leave on holiday. Like, I left to go and work. And it was just, well, this is the system. And I understand that, but it was hard. And of course, in that time, things, as you mentioned, it was like slow. And then
And so it was
crazy.
It got really intense there.
It got super intense. Absolutely. So we ended up having to evacuate. So just to give you context, like there's about 90,000 people that work in this like oil and gas area.
How many?
Right? 90,000 in total. And they're all mostly shift workers. So you're looking at anything from about 45,000 plus that's on shift at any given moment of time. So when COVID hit, it meant that we needed to evacuate these people home. And these were employees and contractors that lived around the world.
All over, yeah.
And as time was passing, countries were closing off their borders. And what that meant for us was that, one, it was a massive logistic mission to get people back home through their embassies, special chartered flights, the testing protocols for each country, the quarantine protocols for each country. But we needed to drop the footprint because we wouldn't be, if there was an outbreak, we wouldn't be able to manage it, right? So the decision was made. And I mean, yeah, we were successful in getting people home, but it was a process for sure. But then, we as everything stopped globally, that also meant that our evacuation options were cut off. So where we had the ability to, if somebody was sick, let's say a foreign employee, we could evacuate them out to our nearest center of excellence, either with our own plane or with an air ambulance. But now that countries were closed, those started closing, those options started closing off. And it got to a point where the countries were only accepting their own citizens into that country. And if you had COVID, you was like, there were very limited places that you could go to because nobody wanted to accept a COVID patient, right? So it just felt like everything was closing in. And then, locally, outside of once we had evacuated or sort of reduced our employee footprint, it then became a mission of okay, well, we need quarantine facilities. We need to expand our hospital capabilities, right? We need to expand ICU. We need oxygen. We need medical staff. So it was this ramp up of trying to pull in, as nurses and doctors were in high demand at the time, and everybody was looking for them everywhere. I mean, we mobilized every single medical staff member that we could. They were flying in from, and we had to get special clearances to get them in. It was intense.
So you could protect the people in
that was left behind.
Yeah.
And a lot of them too, there were expatriates, but there was also a very large national population too, right? That we needed to protect and to provide resources for and ensure that there were options available. But, things like ventilators, oxygen became scarce resources, right? And the local hospitals were overwhelmed. And I remember getting, a call one night from a local employee, begging me to, to help his father who wasn't able to breathe, and they couldn't accept him in the hospital. There was no oxygen. And my hands were tied in what I could do, right? And it just, the intensity of that moment of, I'm trained to help. We're talking about oxygen, right? The life force that we all need, and yet it's something that we're unable to provide, right? I mean, I was trained in a resource-limited setting, right? South Africa, that's how they train us on how to do things when your resources are limited. But my experience in Kazakhstan was something that I will never, ever forget. I'm grateful for it, but it was a crazy time. I think the one thing that I regret, and I've spoken to some of my colleagues from the time, one thing that I regret not doing is journaling every day of what happened. Because when I talk about it, it almost feels, when I go into the details of what was going, we had no paracetamol, we had no, there was no ibuprofen. So how do you manage a fever? Simple things like that became very challenging to manage, in the local context of stuff. It was a very interesting time for sure. And it got to a point where the evacuation routes were closed. I couldn't go home to Singapore. We had no air ambulance to take me home to my home country, which was South Africa, if I got sick. And I was working on the front line. And, the ICUs at the time were full. We had, I think, 2 or 3 ventilators, private in our one facility that we had. We had an anesthetist on board. And I remember, getting home one evening, and it was long days, and sitting standing on the balcony, and there's nobody in the streets. And, I called him and I said to him, there's a chance that we could get sick. We don't know how this is going to play out for any one of us. Are we healthy? Yeah, sure. But we have no guarantees right now. I said, but I have a son back home, and my family is back home, and, the ventilators are in short supply here. So I need you to try and keep me alive. If something happens to me, I need your word that you will try and keep me alive for as long as you can, so that I can see them, or that they can see me. And it was a moment that fundamentally, I think, also played into changing my perspective on life as well.
Because you've never had to face your mortality like that.
Yeah, it was never in my face. And I'd never felt so scared. But you can't let that, if you're leading a team and, you've got to lead by example, and you've got all these nurses working for you, and you're, or in your team, and you're out there swabbing, you can't have that fear, because if I carry that, then you're going to pick up on that energy. You're going to pick up on my fear. So yeah, I over the years, I've learned to box it. It just goes back to your first about pretending, right? And yeah, there is a certain element of that for sure. I think it's a little bit of, you're putting on this brave face. You've also built some capacity to be able to deal with it, but you're mindful of the moment and what your presence means potentially for other people, right? If you're losing your shit, then everybody else around you is going to lose theirs too, right?
Yeah, you're playing with fire by containing those emotions, but if you don't, there's some pretty dire consequences.
Yeah.
You don't really have a choice.
But it has to be released at some point, right? So went through that, was able to get home for a little bit.
And then everything was fine.
Everything was fine at home for a little bit. And then I went back on my next hitch out, and then we all thought COVID was fine, and the borders started opening, and then we were hit with a Delta wave, and then it was round 2.
So you had a good month back home.
It was probably about almost 6 weeks, I think.
And then I was called to go back.
Well, we were expected to go back. We weren't all in the clear yet, but things were looking up, and obviously my contract carried on, so I needed to go back. And I remember when things shut down, I was like, you have got to fucking be kidding me. Here I am again. And there was a risk, I will say. At the time, people were like, oh, we're not sure. This, are they not? Maybe. But again, there's this calling, right? This is what I need to do from a professional standpoint. And maybe I didn't want to believe that it could possibly happen again, right? And then it did. We were hit with the Delta wave. And then I got stuck out for I came back in, I think it was October, I think. So yeah, it was close to 8-9 months again, dealing with very similar things. Although now we then had to pivot, because we went through the Delta wave, and then things kind of quickly progressed to all right, well, now there's all these vaccines, right? So now we need to start vaccinating the working population, and we need to start slowly remobilizing them back in for work. So that became another big logistic move to try and move the workforce back in and get everybody vaccinated. So it was setting up vaccination centers, working with local providers, where we're going to get the vaccines. I've been vaccinated with every vaccine that exists for COVID. But yeah.
So then when you come back after your second hitch, I'm sure at some point you needed to decompress, process something.
Yeah. And so that is when, and of course, the absence put strain on relationships. Yeah. And then slowly but surely started to slowly fall apart,
Was it a case of there was just too much to process, or the intensity
I think it was
was
a bit of both. I think it was combination of what I like, the level of anxiety and stress I had been carrying like through all these months.
Just trying to do the best work you could
and just hold on
in a crisis.
Right. Dealing with, being separated from the family. And that was also a choice that was made, right? Like I could have turned around and not got on that plane.
So you had to face the fact that you made the choice.
Correct. So there was that, and I think a lot of things shifted in that time for many people, I believe. And then, things started to sort of bubble up, let's say. Now you got to face your shit.
What did you have to face? What was bubbling up?
A lot of things, personal relationships, marital relationships, the missing of pivotal moments in that period of time. When you leave, 2 years in a young child's life is a lot. There's a lot of growth that happens in that time, and speaking on the phone is just not the same as being there every day, right? So that was your own personal relationship with your spouse, and then having to deal with just everything that was happening, that I had experienced in Kazakhstan. And I don't regret any of it for one moment. It was a massive learning experience, amazing, traumatic, but amazing. I got to a point where I was, with all that was happening on all fronts, I'm a mental health advocate, right? I started exhibiting all the signs and symptoms of like anxiety, but I wanted to keep my shit together. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to eat properly. So I focused on my nutrition, I'm going to exercise. And at the time, there was no like team sports, and I play field hockey. So that was all done. So you had to like do it at home, right? Gyms were closed, all of that type of stuff. So I had a home gym, doing stuff, yoga, meditation, everything that I knew in my current toolbox to kind of pull on to manage what I was trying to deal with conservatively. And that also included like getting myself into therapy, into counseling, which I think everybody should do, to help make sense of the conflict in my head, all the thoughts, everything that was happening around me in my environment. What does this mean for me now?
It's so helpful to have someone to work through all of it with.
Yeah, to make sense of it, like, to kind of give you a different perspective of seeing things, right? Or to ask the questions that maybe you've never really thought about, and you have to now pause and think. And it was during my therapy that I became more attuned to like my own nervous system. Noticing, it got down to like noticing subtle differences in how your body responds in moments where you feel a little fearful. And that could be somebody approaching you. It could be somebody in your space. But all your body's on high alert all the time, right? It's constantly looking for threats. And your body responds. It keeps the score, right? And so, but we're so used to just moving, like just getting things done, that we're not aware of these subtle things that are happening to us. And I learned how to notice them, which I had never noticed before.
I think in modern society, we've learned this pattern of looking externally for information on how we're doing internally. And we have a whole host of sensors of interoception, where we can build an awareness, but we have to know about it, and then we have to be willing to do the work.
Yeah, and take the time to do it, right?
Yeah, but then if you can, there's some adjustment that you can make there over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you threw everything at it. You threw the exercise, the yoga, the sleep, the nutrition, the
I was sleeping shit because I knew that like I was my like, you know, my cortisol, like I was on sympathetic drive every day.
And then where did it go after that?
So it got to a point where, you know, it was a hard moment for me because while I'm a mental, and this is like the conflict as well, of like being a medical professional and still being human underneath all of it.
How dare you.
Right? How dare. You know, we go through this, we have the same thoughts, we have the same feelings, we have the same fears. And as much as I knew like that it was anxiety that I was having, and that I wasn't able to cope on my own, and the next step would be, okay, maybe you need some medication to help you, right? Just to calm things down. But it took me a long time to get to that point of actually wanting to recognize and accept the fact that I was there. Because I was like, well, what does that mean for me? I'm not able to like handle my shit,
capable.
right? Like, I'm doing all of this. Like, why? Why is it not? And I don't want to be on the medication, right? Because what does that mean? You know, it's the same thoughts that patients have when you're going through this with them is exactly the same thing that happened to me, right? And so it was being on the other side of that consultation room, almost speaking to myself and trying to rationalize, okay, but you know that you need it. You know it's going to help. You know that in, 4 to 6 weeks, this is potentially going to like turn your life around. You'll be able to sleep better. You're going to be able to like think clearer. You're going to be able to function better. You need it.
And did it?
Oh, yes. 100%. 100%.
I had a similar experience. When I went through a really challenging time, I had the same thing. I went to school for the right things, right? Like I have the skills to get through the tough time. And
yeah, because you did psychology. Yeah.
I'm also married to a psychologist who actually in the car one day called me out as I was having this pain in my head. And in a much more elegant way, basically said, I think you're like having an anxiety attack.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, there's something wrong with my brain. It's something bigger than that because I know how to manage the other stuff, right?
Of course.
But same thing, I took too long to get there, and eventually I got there. I'm like, okay, like let's look at the medications. And I went to see the right people. And it is that, like it buys you the time and the capacity to get to a better baseline so you can actually invest in the habits that you need.
Yeah.
So you have the capacity to work yourself out of it, and then you can wean off of it. But pretending like there's no value to that when you need it is just shooting yourself in the foot.
100%. 100%. Yeah, it was a lifesaver for sure. It was a hard conversation in that GP's office.
And when you look back now at all the work that you had to do, mending relationships with your family, exposing yourself to all the mental, emotional, and physical damage, if we can call it that, having to spend, I'm guessing, 6 months to a year healing, trying to learn the process and having to work with doctors.
Still healing. Never ends.
Never ends. Are you proud of the decision that you made to go back to the front line?
Yes. And
why?
It took me a while to be able to confidently say that. Because, I lived in a lot of what ifs for a very long time. What if I didn't take the role? What if I didn't go back on that second? What if I found a way, right? What if after I came back from the first extended time away, what if I didn't go back? A lot of what ifs. And I think there, like even as a mum, I missed birthdays. I missed
Christmases.
That to essentially like 2 years of growth that my son went through, right? 2 years of like, relationship, like spousal relationship that was affected by that for sure. So there was costs, personal costs. But at the same time, I am more than just a mother. I am more than just a wife. Being a doctor, and ultimately that comes down to, in very simple terms, helping other people is at the core of who I am. And that was the time. And I think about this quote from, and I use it a lot, I think it's Oprah Winfrey, that said, you can have everything. You just can't have it all at once. And that sort of like shows, right? Like, yeah, I was in a period of time where, you know, the beginning part of being a trailing spouse, there was a significant portion of time where I was at home. I was able to take my son. I was able to, you know, do things with him, and I still work, but it was more on a sort of part-time basis. But then there's this other season or this other, you know, segment of your life where the priority shifts a little bit because of the circumstances and the environment that you find yourself in. And it's okay. But it's hard to get to that point of acceptance, particularly as a mother. There was a lot of, Imran had asked me once I got back, and that was also something that was very in your face. I'd been gone for an extended period of time. And naturally, as he grew, he no longer liked certain foods. He no longer liked things that way. And so now I come back and I step into the house.
You want up to date.
Correct. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, how about this? Oh, no, he doesn't like that anymore. You know, and so you're almost like this foreigner in your own home.
Yeah.
And it's a very disruptive feeling and place to be, because you now need to adapt to everything else that has been happening, right? And the routines carried on, but you weren't there to evolve with it. And that was hard. And having to answer the question of, but mommy, why have you been away for so long?
Now, a few years on, what do you think he would say? Like, how would he describe it to his friends?
I think he would be proud of what it meant in the bigger scheme of things, right? In the bigger scheme of things, and that's how I choose to look at it.
Well, that's how life works.
Right.
And I think not until I got a bit older did I realize this part, which is, yes, we live in so much tension with the choices that we have to make. And sometimes the choice we make it only wins by a little bit.
Yeah.
And you have to consciously make the sacrifices. But it's helpful to know that in the time that comes in the future, you can switch and you can reinvest in that relationship, and you can regrow sort of new roots and a new version of that. And it can turn into something where it's an even better story of, yes, that was a tough time, but this is what my mom did during COVID.
This is eternally like grateful for that opportunity and the experience that I had. It was eye-opening, learned so much, got to do so many awesome things. Came at a cost, for sure. But I choose to think of it as, you know, I go back to like what my dad, you know, what is meant for you is meant for you.
Yeah.
It's gonna play out the way it's supposed to play out. And this is my journey, right? And I don't have it all figured out yet, but yeah, in the process of, and it will always be a continuous process. That's how I choose to view it. I think when at the time he was so young, like trying to understand that bigger impact, like now he's a lot older. And so making sense of it is easier for him to comprehend that when, you know, when you're younger.
Yeah. And it seems like that whole experience, and then having to recover from having to climb out of a pretty deep hole when you came back set you on like a different version of a path with your, we can call it healing, or your medical journey, or your sort of interests in
Yeah.
what helped you recover. And then it seems to have sort of also broadened the scope of what you're interested in and what you wanted to get into. And I know one area is women's health.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you also had, like, from the recovery process, it led you into a whole new journey on that side of it as well.
Yeah. Definitely sort of like the mental health aspects of like being a woman, a mother, you know, somebody who has a professional dream, you know, path that they want to be on, to then kind of heading into this phase of life of, you know, perimenopause and menopause around the corner and the shifts that happen with that.
I'm familiar. Not until I met you did I realize how little I knew.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I'm grateful for social media, because without it, we wouldn't have had the general awareness of these topics as we have today. So that's a great thing. And I'm big on education, and like, because I feel without the information, without the education, you as a patient, as a client, you're not able to make an informed decision on whatever it is that you need to decide on. And so if we can provide that level of education in a way that is simple to understand and that makes sense to you, and that's tailored to whatever you're going through, then it helps you make better decisions over time, right?
And I do think that type of conversation is most impactful when it happens one-on-one with a patient in clinic or in a health coaching session, because the information is best when personalized, whatever the person is going through.
Yeah.
But maybe let's go into that a little bit. What are some general sort of things we should understand about perimenopause that are starting to come to light now that perhaps people don't realize how much might be impacting them?
Yeah.
I think as I'm trying to fumble my way through this, I'm trying to figure out what is the question I'm supposed to be asking, because I understand, like, everybody knows what menopause is. And my understanding of it is now there's a phase of about a decade before that happens where you can start to get signs and symptoms that maybe present as brain fog and energy issues, and perhaps you want to rip someone's head off, and not my words, your words. And it's really interesting to me, right? Because sometimes my wife wants to rip my head off. And what is it that we don't understand? Or that we're starting to understand that you wish more people understood?
I think the most important thing, firstly, is that we are moving, and we're at a place now where we acknowledge that women, they don't need to suffer through this period and this transition that's happening. And it's a natural transition. It's going to happen to every woman, right? You're right. So let me ask you this question. What is your definition of menopause?
It is the transition where you go from being able to have kids to not being able to have kids anymore at the broadest level.
Okay.
I'm going to leave it at that, because if I say any more, maybe it looks stupid.
Okay, so think of it as a timeline, right? When women, girls are born, females are born, you are born, if you're born female, you are born with ovaries, and you are born with a set number of eggs. And those eggs are going to be released once a month. Once you hit puberty and you start your menstruation, you will ovulate as part of your cycle. That egg will be released once a month. That egg gives you the superpower of being able to conceive and carry a baby for 9 months if that egg is fertilized. You need sperm to be fertilized. So that happens, right? You get older, you have your menstrual period every month. We're talking average woman now, right? You have your period every month. you ovulate, you drop, you release an egg, right? If in that particular month, there is no fertilization of the egg, what then happens is the lining inside the uterus then sheds, right? Because the egg is not fertilized. And so the egg and the lining of the uterus sheds, and that's your menstrual period. This happens every month. Again, we're talking average women with a normal cycle. Then you get to a point where, now let me just use a very arbitrary number just for the sake of explaining this in very simplistic terms. You have 100 eggs, and every month you're losing an egg. You're going to get to a point where the number of eggs are now down to double digits, low double digits. As you get older, your cells are also aging. Your body is aging. And just like the egg and the rest of the cells in your body, it's aging too. So the function of these eggs and its ability to do what it needs to do when you are in your 20s and your 30s is very different to the eggs that you now have in your 40s and early 50s. Menopause is a moment in time. And so we diagnose that, and it's a retroactive or retrospective diagnosis. We look back in time.
Okay.
So if a patient comes in and says to their doctor, they're usually it's around, 52, 55, you can oftentimes look to your mother. It gives you a good gauge of when you can expect to be going into menopause. But you have to have had the cessation, so no periods, for 12 consecutive months. And at that moment in time, that is when you are diagnosed as being menopausal.
Got it.
You haven't had your period, which means you're not ovulating. So the quality of the eggs are no longer there. The number of eggs are you don't have that 100 anymore. So the function of the ovaries has now kind of like the factory stopped working, simple terms, right? Yep. When the factory stops working, that brings in a whole host of issues. Why? Because this factory actually plays a very important role in all cells in our body, right? From our head to our toes. The hormones that are part of this factory's processes, estrogen in particular, is on every cell in the female body. That's why the symptoms that women experience during the transition period, perimenopause, menopause, are so vast and can range from brain fog to itchy ears, to ringing of the ears, which we call tinnitus, to, they've noticed an increase in body fat, particularly around their abdomens, right? The central part of their body. It comes up as skin changes. They start to notice their hair doesn't have the same texture anymore. They have these mood changes, right? Where for no reason, they're responding in what would be described as a very overwhelming way for whatever's happening, right? It can't really be explained. Your sleep is shit. You're just off. You don't feel like yourself anymore. You don't have libido, maybe, right? And again, every woman is going to be different. Some may not have any of these, and it might not, or maybe they do, and it's not even noticeable that it's affecting their life. There are other women who can have multiple symptoms where it really affects their quality of life. But if you think about just human evolution, where we are today, if you, go back, let's say, 100 years, 50 years, no, let's say, 50 to 100 years ago, right? We weren't living 100 years ago. We weren't living to the ages of 85, late 70s, early 80s. we died.
Mm-hmm.
Women died, before the age, some of them before the age of 40. So, and now with healthcare becoming so advanced, our population advancing in every area of life, we're living longer. And so with that now comes another part of, we have this defining moment. So the 10 years, you have that cessation of periods for 12 consecutive months. And usually this is around the age 52, 55. That's menopause. The time before that is perimenopause. Peri meaning around this part of the timeline. And that can vary from up to 10 years. For some women, it could be only 6 months, 3 months, right? So it's a variable period. And then on this side of the timeline, you are now post-menopause. And so when the factory stops working, it means that your body is no longer producing these key sex hormones that you need to be able to function fully. Estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. And yes, women have testosterone too. We just don't have it in such a high concentration as men do. But it's a very important hormone in our body to allow us to function properly and optimally. So when your factory isn't working anymore, but you're expected to live for another 25, 30 years in this state with key hormones that are no longer there, it becomes a big problem. Now, historically, my grandmother, even my mother going through it initially, hormone therapy and treating this perimenopause, menopause, wasn't really a thing, right? And it wasn't a thing because, one, it was just for many years assumed that this was just part of the natural aging process. Like, this is just what you need to go through. It's life, right? We also then, the medical community, we were set back by a very large study that puts a big warning on hormone replacement therapy. And all of a sudden it went to, there's a risk of breast cancer. It's not safe to give hormone replacement therapy to women who are menopausal, postmenopausal. So obviously that created an environment where doctors were hesitant because that was the evidence, right?
And so what do we know now?
So now we know that the study that was relied upon, the data was not accurate. And there were, when you look at hormones in the human body, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, that your body produces, it was very different to the hormone therapy, replacement therapy that was given to the study participants in this particular study, right? They weren't given bioidentical hormones, which is it's a key difference, right, in how you're managing it. So, the details and the nuances of that study compared to, the population that we were actually treating created fears that caused a pivot in how we managed women transitioning in this period of their life. So where we are today is, one, we are a lot more aware of these terms, perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. With social media, that education level has risen, right? And we're now starting to see interest in the area because now it's like, okay, well, yeah, this is making sense to me now because this is exactly what I'm experiencing, right? Whether you're a perimenopausal female or postmenopausal, whatever your symptoms are, now it's like, okay, well, yeah, it's not just me. There's a reason why all these things are happening. There's a reason why I'm feeling this way. There's a reason why I feel like I want to just, kill my husband one day in one very specific moment. And then the next moment, I could be quite happy and elated, right? And it's got to do with these shifts of hormones and then the decline, and then sort of like this, you're no longer producing them anymore, right? So that's sort of, if you look at a timeline, what is happening.
We now understand the reasons, and we also have solutions.
Correct.
And if someone is curious or interested or trying to figure out how to approach this, does it start with the symptoms? Is it like, how have I been feeling? Does it feel off, as in not like how I usually am? And from there, they do some self-investigation.
So I think it goes to, one, if we're specifically talking about, perimenopause, if you're talking about perimenopause, menopausal women, the question is first, how old are you? Do you fit in the age brackets of where we could be expecting this? Again, I'm talking
40.
about, so you're looking at sort of like, most of the time it's sort of mid-40s on average, but you get women who are going to go through menopause, perimenopause, from the age of 35 potentially. So again, every woman is different, just like when you look at your friends around you, when you went through puberty, your friends maybe went through it at a different time, right? When I started my period, it was different to my cousins. So same thing, right? So we look at a period of time, but usually mid-40s. Perimenopause, when you can expect it to start to happen. And then in this period, I think the question is, you have to take a holistic approach to it, right? Because there's lots of things that can cause us to sleep shitty at night, right? Maybe we went out the night before and you consumed alcohol. Maybe you just got off a long haul flight and your circadian rhythm is messed up, right? Maybe there's just other stresses that are happening in life that is contributing to all of this. So it's about understanding what's going on in this person's, this woman's life, and the list of symptoms, like what is she experiencing? Perimenopause is not a diagnosis that is made on a blood test.
Oh, it is not?
It's not.
Okay.
It's a clinical diagnosis, meaning you, as a medical professional, look at your patient, you take their history, you examine them. Do they fit in this range approximately of where you're expecting perimenopause to hit? Have you excluded any of the other conditions that could be contributing to some of these symptoms? Have you checked her thyroid, for example? Things like that. So you're kind of excluding things that could potentially contribute to this cluster of symptoms. And if you've excluded that and she fits into that period, then you could make the diagnosis of, well, this could be perimenopause. Maybe we should try. And again, your foundation is always lifestyle stuff, right?
Yep.
So you're talking about nutrition, exercise, and then you layer on top of that, right? And the intent behind the management, when we're specifically talking about medication, hormones, what we're trying to do at a very simplistic level is we're trying to give that woman like her hormones back, right? We're trying to take it back to the level that it was earlier, before it started sort of fluctuating or stopping, so that she doesn't experience these symptoms. And again, how women respond is different. Every woman's going to be different. So it has to be tailored, and your provider needs to work with you. You start on something, and that in itself, which hormone, how much, is tailored to you. And it's a process that you work with your doctor along, right? We then evaluate you again in 3 months, and we decide, or you come back a month later, is everything good? We repeat blood tests again in 3 months' time, or just to make sure that everything is on track. But most importantly, it's about, well, how are you responding? Yes, I've noticed my sleep is better because I've added the 100 milligrams of progesterone at night. Yes, I've noticed that by starting on the estrogel, it's significantly improved just my overall well-being, right? I don't have the brain fog anymore. I'm noticing like, the mood changes are not there. I just feel better.
It sounds pretty life-changing.
It can be for sure. And I think it's about women knowing that there are options available to them. And not everybody, patient autonomy is big, it's huge. And again, it comes down to the education part. As a health coach, as a medical professional, the job is to give you the information so that you can understand what is happening to your body right now.
And then you choose.
What does it mean over time for me, though? Like, if I live into my 80s and I don't have appropriate levels of estrogen, what are the potential consequences of that, right? Things like that. Like, how does, if you've got no libido as a female and you're in a relationship and that is causing tension in the relationship, right? Would it not make sense then, if you're wanting to improve that aspect because you've noticed a difference and you're wanting to improve that part of your relationship, to address the fact that you don't have a libido, right? Because there's knock-on effects with that, right? You do that, your relationship with your partner becomes better. You're now, you have that intimacy back, and that in itself has got a positive feedback mechanism to your own mental health. To your sense of security, to your sense of belonging, that connection that you have, right? So it's about looking at the bigger picture, right?
Yeah.
And
it's also integrated.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to the conversation about health span, which is how well we get to live in the years that we have, I think this context doesn't get talked about enough. There is a subjective experience of life that can be improved by making some of these shifts. And whether that's with hormone replacement therapy, if that's suitable for you, or with some framework adjustments in terms of how you deal with problems, or if it's, doing a blood test and realizing that there's some simple deficiency there that you can supplement to get,
like vitamin D3,
or learning to manage your central nervous system so you know how to calm down. You develop the skill set to decompress or to unwind when it's time to do that, and to switch states and be able to be fully present. All of these are capacities that, like you said, they're options that we have now. And I think it's really cool that this is becoming, on the women's health front with the perimenopause stuff, I think it's really cool that it's becoming so widely talked about, because people need to know they have options.
Absolutely.
And so I do have a question. From the outside listening in, because obviously this is talked about a lot in sort of our age bracket, it seems there's a lot of frustration from women who've seen and read and heard about the right things, and they go to their GPs or they go to a doctor, and it seems from the outside listening in that they get sort of shot down of like, that's not something that you need to look into. What is the context here that, as a guy, I would not know?
So remember I mentioned the historical perception of menopause as just part of your natural aging process, and you kind of just need to deal with it. That's the first thing. The second is the WHI study that was done, which puts fear into sort of the medical world around treating us and hormones in general, and how we approach this, because we don't want to give, first do no harm, and we didn't want to prescribe. That's what I was taught in medical school, right? Is that you had to be really, really careful because there was this breast cancer risk. And to be honest, if you look back, now the education is slowly starting to change, where these topics are being discussed in more detail, but historically they weren't, We probably spent more time in medical school learning about the menstruation cycle versus what happens after menopause, at menopause, perimenopause. You know, maybe you got a 1-hour lecture on it. Not a lot of time was spent educating around this particular phase in a woman's life. Yet, we spend a significant amount of time there. So that's the second thing to bear in mind. And
Yes, it's mostly just doctors trying to do no harm.
has been, correct. And now it's shifted, right? So what we now know is that the study that we all relied upon, and again, that was the evidence at the time that we were acting on, wasn't interpreted correctly. So what that did is it kind of, from women's health management perspective, kind of regressed us a little bit. Actually a lot, not just a little bit, right? In terms of like professional medical education, doctors' perception, and willingness and openness to manage this particular phase within a woman's life.
Well, I think willingness and openness is one thing, but also I'm assuming to recalibrate and to adjust your perspective, you would have to first take a keen interest in it as a busy doctor and go do a bunch of your own learning on it and go to the right conferences and read the right papers, which is very easy to say, but
when you've got
doctors are busy, right?
Hundreds of thousands of different conditions that you can manage,
Yeah.
right? Or that you have to be aware of. Exactly that, right? So for the people, I would say the medical professionals in the space at the moment, it's because there was a keen interest in it. So we've taken the step beyond to kind of educate ourselves around it. And so, yes, like even as a health coach, I've had several women come in, like they're at their wits' ends and they're looking for help because they're struggling. And they check all the boxes, right? But they've been to providers in the past who have told them, yeah, this is normal. And that was the end of the discussion, right? A little bit of, I think you need to exercise a little bit more. You need to, eat a little bit better. But it certainly wasn't dissected in a way that it could have been. And what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that they're at fault. I'm saying that was the system that created all of this. That's what it was. We are now at a pivotal point where things are shifting for the right reasons. And I think if you are a woman in this day and age, particularly, if you're sort of younger and you're coming up, it's a privilege to be able to live in this space now because there is more awareness, because you have access to information, right? Through social media. And just make sure you're getting your information from credible sources, but it's out there. Doctors who are interested in this, professionals who are interested in this space are talking about it to try and educate everybody. And so it's a privilege because your great-grandmother wasn't able to have these discussions.
Yeah, they didn't have the option.
They didn't have the information at all, right?
Yeah. It has been really cool to see, even with the medical partners that we have here, the guy who's sort of really interested in men's health and those issues talks about it very openly, like, hey, I think we should work with this doctor and this doctor because they have a special interest there. And this is not something that a patient should see me for. I think that type of nuance is super important.
Absolutely.
Okay, so while we're on the topic of, what we've gotten wrong about women's health, it seems like another thing that is sort of in our cultural consciousness when it comes to the recovery stuff is we may be missing some of the nuances there as well. And one sort of easy example there is we all sort of understand now that in the cold plunge, we don't need to take it into such ridiculously low temperatures.
Yeah.
And particularly for women, 10 degrees and up
Yeah.
is a better idea because of the stress on the nervous system. What else is there here in terms of the nuances when it comes to recovery? I don't know if I should be asking this question in the context of like a woman's cycle or if there's something else. Maybe if you are dealing with certain types of stresses, are there certain types of recovery you should do versus others? What is the nuance here that you wish women would know about a little bit more?
So I think anybody, and particularly females, when you walk into or you're wanting to look at recovery services, and here I'm talking about, if we look at a contrast suite where you've got a sauna, be that an infrared sauna or a traditional sauna, a cold plunge, so that's your contrast suite, red light therapy, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, right? So if you look at those sort of 4 modalities of services that you can tap into, I think one thing I would like people in general to understand is that how you do it, the sequencing of it, is important. And it's important because we have to take into consideration where you are in that moment in time and what are you trying to achieve, right? So that's where the cycle comes in, right? We as women, we're talking average women here, 28 to 32 days is your menstrual cycle, right? Day 1 is when your period starts. Then usually you bleed anything from 5 to 7 days. Again, here I'm talking average, right? 5 to 7 days, that's the menstrual phase of the menstrual cycle. Once your period stops, right? So remember, you have your period. A female has her period because she has ovulated midway through her cycle and there has been no pregnancy. So the lining that the egg would normally attach to as part of fertilization now gets shed. So menstrual phase, day 1 of your bleed, day 1 of your cycle. 5 to 7 days, then you're going to go into what we call the follicular phase, right? And that's sort of like where your ovary is starting to prepare for this big event called ovulation, right? And usually around day 14, day 15 of your menstrual cycle, you are going to ovulate. And so your ovary is going to release one of the eggs down into release it from the ovary, and it's going to travel down the fallopian tube, and it's waiting there in anticipation for sperm to come and fertilize, right? If you don't fertilize that egg in the viable time that egg is there, then another phase kicks in, which is called your luteal phase. And all these phases have different shifts in hormones that happen.
Okay.
So it's important to understand from a woman's perspective because every hormone has a function, right? And where you are in your cycle and how you can be strategic in using different recovery services to get the most benefit out of it, right? And so that's what we aim to do here, right? Everybody's cycle is going to be different. That's not to say that you're prohibited from doing certain recovery services at different points in your menstrual cycle. What I'm saying is have the awareness to know that your body might be on high alert right now, right? Because you have these hormone fluctuations in a particular phase of your cycle. So jumping into the cold plunge, your body might not appreciate that in that moment in time. And if that is your first time that you're coming to experience this, it might put you off for the rest of your life, for example, or it might make you very hesitant in trying to try it again. But the only reason that maybe your body responded in that moment in time was because of where you were in your menstrual cycle, and it just wasn't happy and wanting to accept that cold plunge in that moment, right? So that's where, when you come into like what we've developed here at Matter is to personalize that experience, right? So that it's meaningful and it's impactful, and that we can be strategic in how we use it based on one, where you are and what you're wanting to achieve out of this.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting frame for the recovery stuff, right? Because we sort of take a baseball bat approach to it now of, hey, I'm feeling run down, let me do some stuff so I feel better. And what you're suggesting is if we just have a deeper understanding of what each of the recovery services provides, we can be strategic and we can optimize the specific recovery stimulus or effect that we want.
Yeah.
And look, I totally understand that information is best served with like a person in front of you and you understanding a little bit more history. But can you give us some sort of broad strokes of, depending on what phase you're in of your cycle, how you might want to sequence your therapies, or which one you should focus on if you just want to do one?
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with day one of your menstrual cycle. Day one of your menstrual cycle, so that's the first day of your period, 5 to 7 days approximately. That's the menstrual phase. And here, the goal would be to try and recover and conserve energy, right? So if you had to think then about what the best way would be to sequence recovery services, you would want to do red light first in this particular phase. Why? Because red light is a more gentle form of recovery. But what it also does is it shifts the body into a sort of parasympathetic state. Okay? Parasympathetic means it's your sort of calm, rest and digest state. Your sympathetic nervous system, if that's on fire, then think sympathetic, think stress, think fight or flight, right? So when you are menstruating, you have the lowest amount of estrogen and progesterone at that moment in time, okay? And you also have a very high inflammatory sensitivity that's going on. So we want to ease you into the recovery phase and conserve energy. So red light first. We want to sort of activate the mitochondria, which is done through red light therapy. And then we want to allow your body to shift from a sympathetic state to parasympathetic, right? So once you've done the red light therapy, the plan is, because of the physiology, that's how you would emerge from the red light therapy, slightly calmer, a little bit more zen. And then what we want to do is we want to put you in the hyperbaric chamber.
Okay.
The hyperbaric chamber works best when the body is in a calm, relaxed state. And so we want to put you into the hyperbaric chamber to give you that additional oxygen to help with the recovery and to kind of like give you a little bit of that energy boost, right? After hyperbaric, now we've flooded the body with oxygen in a high pressure environment. And the goal there is to get as much oxygen as we can into the different fluids within the body, so that when you step out of the hyperbaric chamber and you then proceed into our contrast room and you do infrared sauna is a very gentle way of heating the body. It works different to traditional sauna. Traditional sauna kind of heats up the air around, but what infrared does is it heats up your skin. So it's a gentle way, and we're not going to extreme temperatures that you can. Traditional saunas are generally a lot higher. So women can sit in the sauna and can tolerate the infrared sauna a lot better for an extended period of time. And you want to have that extended period of time because what you want is the activation of the proteins, right, that are released. And so that is also part of the recovery. So you now have, emerging from the H-bot, you've got, your body has got more oxygen than it had before, and this is now dissolved into various fluids. You step out, there's a pressure change. The hyperbaric, the magic happens when you leave the chamber. That's a whole other discussion too. You go into the sauna. You're now gently heating up your skin. And when that happens, your circulation, so causes vasodilation, which means your blood starts to flow a little bit better. And so there you're talking about like then the movement of that fluid that now has oxygenation is now able to flow better through the body. At this point in time, and many women who are used to doing, let's say, contrast therapy will tell you instinctively, I don't like doing it when I'm on my period, right?
Yeah.
And not because, you know, they don't want to get, it's because of how their body responds in that moment of time. So you don't want to do a cold plunge during your period because you are in a state where you have the lowest levels of estrogen and progesterone, and you need to respect that. So you want to strategically support the body. So that's what happens through the menstrual phase. Then you're going on to the next phase, which is the follicular phase.
Before we get there, just to summarize it for people, just so I get it right as well.
Yeah.
In the first, let's just call it 1 to 7-ish days, the ideal, like ultimate sequence would be red light into hyperbaric, into
infrared sauna, skip the cold plunge.
Skip the cold plunge.
Yeah. Then you're supporting your body systems for what is happening at that moment in time.
And your hormones,
And your hormones, correct.
Because it helps you shift into a more parasympathetic rest and digest state so you can calm down.
Yeah.
And it helps oxygenate the right tissues and the right fluids.
Yeah.
And then it helps you chill out some more in the infrared sauna and promotes vasodilation and better circulation.
So you're getting extra sort of the benefits of the hyperbaric is now sort of being amplified, if you will, in the sauna because you're having this vasodilation, right?
And so can I ask, in that phase, when you have the time to do that sequence, what does that feel like? Like how much more recovered do you feel? Like how much deeper does the rest feel?
I think women come out and it's like like I feel like I can handle this now, you know? It's amazing for us, like when we see people going into the contrast, and whether it's women who are only accessing the infrared and then they go and they have, you know, a lukewarm shower after and they come out, you can see it on their faces.
That's what they need.
Yeah. They come in and you see the tension and they come out and there's this like, like that's exactly what I needed, right? The problem with a cold plunge is if you were to cold plunge in that time, you're giving your body a controlled stressor, which is going to activate your sympathetic nervous system. And cold plunge is done for that very reason, right? Because we want to train the nervous system to manage that particular controlled stressor so we can build up the resilience, right, over time.
Yep.
We're adapting to that stressor, right?
But we can just dose it in other phases.
Correct.
Right? We can
Correct.
map that more aggressive, acute sympathetic response to a phase where you can tolerate it and actually get the adaptations that we want.
Yeah. So then if you go into your follicular phase, right? So this is your period, you've stopped your period, let's say day 7, and before you ovulate, right? The follicular phase, again, what's happening biologically is the ovary is kind of like preparing the egg for this grand release, right? Every month, ovulation. And so here, what's happening is over time, your estrogen levels in these days, you've gone from a very low estrogen progesterone level to your estrogen level starting to rise over these couple of days. And what that means is your tolerance to be able to handle stress is a lot better as well. So that means that we can pivot into changing up the sequencing of the recovery services that would be most beneficial to that particular phase of the month.
And so how do we do it?
You can start with high contrast because your body is able to tolerate it now, right? So you can go into the contrast suite and you can do infrared cold plunge and, you know, sequence that over the period of time that you're there because you are able to manage it. What I would say is whether you're in the contrast room for 30 minutes or you're in there for an hour, your cold plunge should always be somewhere between 1 to 3 minutes. You don't need anything more than that.
Yep.
And listen to your body. That is most important. And don't just, if it's your first time, you don't ever want to just get in, right? You got to slowly work up to this. But that part of the month means hormonally, you're in a better position to be able to handle what we call this hormetic stress.
Yep, that acute spike.
Correct.
Yep.
So contrast room, do both. You can manage the cold plunge if you want. If you're a newbie, do a cold shower.
Yep.
Right? But end with the infrared sauna. So you're ending in a state where you're calmer. You have the vasodilation, right? Because that's what happens in the infrared sauna. And then we are going to take you into the hyperbaric chamber.
Damn, I guessed wrong.
You felt red light?
I'm trying to. Okay, so you go from contrast for 1 or 2 rounds in not a super intense way, ending on the infrared for vasodilation, better circulation, into the hyperbaric because
we want to now give your body the oxygen. We've now vasodilated. Because look, what we're doing here is we're giving you what we call a hormetic stress, which is the term that we use, right? It's a controlled stressor that's just enough to allow the body to adapt over time and build up that adaptation, right? Because that's what this is doing.
Yep.
So this is a good time to be able to do that in this part of your cycle.
Got it.
Hormonally, you can manage it. And then from there, the vasodilation means you've got really good blood flowing now. And then we're taking you into the hyperbaric oxygen chamber. And there we're giving you the extra oxygen. And we're in that pressurized environment to elevate, again, the oxygen levels in the different fluid inside the body so that when you come out of the chamber, you're able to, that oxygen can diffuse into other areas of the body that maybe it wouldn't have received under normal circumstances. And then we're going to end with red light because what we want to do is, again, we want to kind of like, we've done this hormetic stress adaptation route and we've given you the oxygen. We now want to end with red light to kind of bring you back down and continue that, bring you into that parasympathetic state so that we can calm the nervous system down and that you're ready to go and feel that you have the capacity for the rest of the day.
Nice. Okay, so in this second phase, the follicular phase, the ideal sequence, if you have the time, is to do a couple of rounds of contrast, meaning a little bit of time in the cold plunge, no need to go too crazy with it, and then 10 to 15 minutes in the infrared sauna.
Yeah.
The preference would be to end in the infrared sauna. So you get the hormetic stress of the hot and the cold, but you're a little bit more parasympathetic when you leave, and you get the vasodilation, which means better circulation, which has you primed for the hyperbaric. And when you get into the hyperbaric, the oxygen can do its magic, or can start.
You're not coming, because if you were to reverse it, for example, let's imagine a scenario where you end with a cold plunge. If you've just come out of that cold plunge, what happens during cold plunge is you've got vasoconstriction, right? Now you're going into the hyperbaric chamber, and we want vasodilation because we want as much oxygen under that controlled environment in the chamber to be working its magic. So we've got to be, again, I go back to like strategic on how we use these sources.
Yeah, this nuance is so important because it's not that it won't work well. It's just that you could make it work better. By doing this little
tweaking, a little tweaking. Right?
Okay, so then contrast for a couple of rounds into the hyperbaric to get the oxygen. And then into the red light to sink you back into a deeper parasympathetic state.
So you're leaving here, zen.
Super good night of sleep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that would be the same. So I'm going to take you because, if you look at ovulation, that's like, 2 days, right? So this follicular phase into up until you ovulate, because ovulation is your highest energy state within the cycle, right? Because all your hormones are at amazing levels. Again, the body is priming, so you always have to come back to physiology. That's how we approach it here, right? Physiology first, and then we move to what is the outcome. But we have to respect the physiology that's happening. So if you look at ovulation, best time of the month, women are their happiest. Why? Because the body was made to reproduce. And so to create that environment, everything is at its best, right? So what you're doing in the follicular phase, you also do during ovulation, because your body has the capacity to manage it, right? Because you're at this high energy state. So if you think about it really from a menstrual cycle standpoint, you could chop it into like 3 blocks, right? You've got the menstrual phase, no cold plunge, body doesn't want it, doesn't like it. And you're always going to have exceptions, right? I'm talking about just average physiology, what's happening. Then you've got the follicular phase leading up to ovulation. Body is better primed to manage the hormetic stress that we want to cause that adaptation over time. And then, so we've gotten up to ovulation, and then we hit the last part of like the cycle, right? The luteal phase. So this is the period just before you are going to menstruate, okay? And again, you have various fluctuations in hormones that are starting to happen. So during this phase, what we want to focus on is supporting your nervous system, right? So it's more of a like supportive sequencing that we're doing. So in this phase, what we want to do is goal is support the nervous system. We start with a red light. We want to bring the body into the parasympathetic states so that it's ready and primed. From there, we want to go into the contrast, right? And you want to do the infrared sauna. And again, here I'll say this, it's optional at this point whether you want to do the cold plunge. And if you are going to do it, again, you want to keep it short, right? To 1 to 3 minutes as part of your cold plunge experience. From the infrared sauna, you then want to go into the hyperbaric chamber. Again, there it's about you're prepping the system, ready to receive the oxygen because you've got the vasodilation, etc. And after that, how you decide to sequence it, because usually what happens with our clients is they will come into the contrast room and they will do the sessions and back, alternate it, and then they will head into the hyperbaric chamber. But it's up to you whether if you have the time, you could also do the sauna, vasodilation, and now you're getting into the hyperbaric chamber. So you're getting that extra oxygen, and then you can do a cold plunge after. So that could be tweaked as well.
Yeah, it sounds like in the luteal phase, you have a little bit more optionality in terms of dosing based on what you think you need. And we should start on the red light to get the nervous system calmed down, activate the parasympathetic. And when we go into the contrast, we definitely still want to finish on the infrared sauna. But if, for example, we're in a high training phase and we're sore from workouts or something of that nature, and we want to use the cold plunge to alleviate some of that soreness, in this phase, it would be completely fine to do that based on how you feel.
Yeah.
But do it for a little while and finish in the infrared. And in an ideal world, schedule your HBOT right after that.
Yeah.
Okay. So it seems like in the first phase, the menstrual phase, the ideal sequence is red light therapy to calm the nervous system down, and then into the HBOT to oxygenate, and then into the infrared sauna, no cold plunge.
No cold plunge.
So we can help the body relax and get vasodilation and circulation. Mm-hmm. And shower up and feel amazing, go back, have a great night of sleep.
Yeah.
And it seems like for the follicular and ovulation phases, the most potent sequence for a recovery stimulus would be to start on the contrast, because your body can tolerate more stress in these phases.
Yes.
And the recommendation is still, don't need to spend too long in the cold plunge. Get your spike of hormetic stress. Finish on the infrared. Get yourself nice and chilled out, vasodilation, get good circulation going before you head into the HBOT, where it can do its magic with oxygen in a state where you're ready to push oxygen to all the tissues and all the fluids in your body.
Yeah.
And then finish off in the red light therapy to bring it back down and bring your parasympathetic nervous system activation back in, so you can, again, leave feeling really chill, have a great night of sleep.
Yeah.
And so for the luteal phase, that last phase of the cycle, when we first come in, let's get the nervous system to chill out again by getting into the red light therapy bed first. And once we have that nice parasympathetic activation, we can go into the contrast, and we have some options to play with here because your body can tolerate some. And if, for example, you're in a zone of high training volume and you have some soreness that you need to manage, in this phase, it's completely fine to do some sauna and cold plunge, but do try and end on the infrared sauna so you get the vasodilation and you get the enhanced circulation. And then you finish your sequence with the H-bot in that state to get all the benefits of the oxygenation.
Yeah.
That's super cool. I didn't realize that there was this much nuance to how we can dose the recovery.
Yeah. And some women actually, it's funny though, like, you know, when I've taken women through, you know, tours of the space, and I've been on a few tours where I would ask the question, you know, what part of your cycle are you on? And we'd get into the contrast room and, you know, for some, if they're on their period and you start talking about cold plunge,
They're like, ugh.
they're like, no, I don't think I can do that now, you know. And it's also about then understanding that too, which is why I feel the education is really important, because cold plunge is a powerful recovery tool that you can use. There's a lot of benefits. And I don't want women to come in and just experiment and then they're put off by it and then hesitant to ever try it again.
I think even for me as a non-woman, you know, before Matter, most of my recovery stuff was, you know, sleep and nutrition, and then contrast, like hot and cold stuff. It's just what I've always done. And I didn't realize that, or maybe I didn't have access to other recovery modalities. Some days now, because I'm a little bit more in tune with the recovery stimulus that my body actually wants, I show up and I don't really want to get in the cold plunge. And in the past, I'd be like, well, like, you need some recovery, just go do the thing. And while that attitude can be important, now I can get into the red light therapy bed and do a 25-minute thing and get a recovery stimulus and leave feeling really relaxed and not send my nervous system into overdrive on a day where I already know, like, doing the contrast would just be a little bit too intense right now.
Yeah.
And it's making me think, as we're having this conversation about sequencing according to the cycle, how else can we think about sequencing? So, for example, if I came in with jet lag, or I came in like I do every day now because I have 2 young kids and I don't sleep very well, is there some stuff we can play with here when it comes to the sequencing of these therapies?
So we go back to like basics, right? Physiology first, and then what are we trying to achieve? Then outcome. So it's important to understand where you're at. So if you're sleep deprived, you're jet lagged, yes, there is a better way to sequence your recovery to get what you're trying to achieve. Because for you to have a good night's rest, what we're wanting is for you not to leave the space in a sympathetic, high alert, you know, you've got dopamine and norepinephrine sort of like running through your system because you ended with the cold plunge. That's not going to be good for you tonight when you go to bed, right? So yes, there are, depending on what we're trying to achieve. So for example, broadly speaking, right, we've dealt with women, menstrual cycles, appreciate what's happening on the physiological front. Likewise, individuals who are high stress, for example, right? So you're looking at people who are just generally are operating in a high cortisol environment all the time. So their sympathetic nervous system is where things are happening, right? So let's group that as one. You've got another group where you've got autoimmune, you've got inflammatory states, got high inflammation. And in an autoimmune conditions, the immune system is not able to respond as it should, right? So there is a way to sequence that, sequence recovery that is going to make sense for that particular subset of individuals.
And maybe we can, we don't have that much time left, but I think it's really important that we try and tackle this one. Maybe if we can talk about those groupings, right? So we have people who are sleep deprived and jet lagged. I'm assuming those would be lumped together. We have people that typically operate in a really high stress environment. And we have people with autoimmune issues or dealing with high inflammation.
Yeah.
And so how, just really quickly, how do we sequence?
So nervous system on overdrive, here we're talking chronic stress states, high cortisol states. And so the sequence generally would be red light first, infrared sauna, hyperbaric chamber, and I'll put a question mark around cold plunge. And I'm going to put an optional bracket there, and I'll explain in a moment, right? So red light first. Why? Because this is the gentle entry point for you, right? You're coming in a highly stressed state already.
High cortisol.
We want to land. We want to land the plane. Okay. Bring it down.
Yep.
So red light does that for us really nicely because it promotes that parasympathetic shift. And that's really via the nitric oxide signaling that happens as part of the therapy. So we've landed the plane. You're now in a parasympathetic state compared to when you first walked in. We've now primed your system to better receive the infrared sauna. So we're putting you in the infrared sauna. And so this is where we're mimicking that kind of hormetic stressor, right? The safe stress, because we know that after sauna, it kind of leads to this natural calming state, right? Because of all the really good things that happens to the body during that time in the sauna. You've got the vasodilation that's happening at the same time. And so you're prepping the body, again then, to receive the oxygen, right? So oxygen flow in the hyperbaric chamber, that improves your cerebral oxygenation and induces this sort of like mental quietness, right? And that's how we want you to leave the space if you are in nervous system overdrive. Why I put the optional is because here, that brief exposure to cold plunge could do more harm to your system than good, right? Because you've got to appreciate where you're at. And that is a strong sympathetic response. So I would actually say, be very cautious there and rather leave it out and err on the side of caution. But you are going to have individuals who are going to be like, well, we can handle that. And if it's earlier in the daytime, then okay.
Yeah, so if you come in a really high stress state at say 2 or 3 p.m. and you still have the rest of your workday to go, but you know you need some recovery, you do the red light to chill out, and you do the infrared to chill out and get better circulation, vasodilation. You do the hyperbaric to get the oxygenation benefits and the mental clarity and to get better sleep later that day. And if you need to amp back up, you could get in the cold plunge then, but not necessary.
Not necessary. And if you do, keep it really short.
Yeah, keep it really
like 30 seconds, 60 seconds max, nothing longer.
Get over the first wall. And
correct. Yeah. And then you're prepping.
Okay, so for the sleep deprived, maybe jet lag population as well.
So here the goal is to, because your circadian rhythm is fucked, right?
Yep.
Goal is to restore the circadian rhythm, and we want to improve your mitochondrial energy. Mitochondria is like the powerhouse of your cell. Okay, so in this particular sequence, what we want to do is we want to start you off in the hyperbaric chamber. By doing so, what we're doing is we're increasing through the chamber oxygenation, pressurization, mitochondrial ATP production, and that will then also improve your alertness without a stimulus, right?
Without caffeine.
Without caffeine, without a cold plunge, right? So from there, we actually will take you into the red light.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, because the red light therapy bed helps support the circadian rhythm, okay? And it's a signal to your body to kind of like reset the biological timing, okay? Again, this is daytime, right? So you're not going to do any of these services late at night because, again, we're trying to reset the circadian rhythm. That's the goal of what we're trying to achieve. So daytime, we'll start hyperbaric, you go into the red light therapy, and from there, we want you to do the contrast room and do the sauna, infrared sauna, because that, promotes relaxation and prepares you for sleep later in the day. And then I'm going to say, if you are wanting to do cold plunge, it's okay for you to do so, but in the daytime only. And you should really plan that to the morning side of your day, because it is a stimulus and it's going to activate that brief sympathetic, drive that you're going to get, and it's going to make you feel alert. So like if you're jet lagged, for example, right, and you want to come in for the morning, do that in the morning so that you can get through the day and you're doing all the right stuff to help support your circadian rhythm and kind of like reset that clock again.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So if you're sleep deprived or you're jet lagged, definitely try and get your recovery sequence in earlier in the day. And the sort of ideal sequence would be to start in the hyperbaric to get the mitochondrial support. So you have the mental capacity and physical capacity to get through the day that is to come.
Yeah, and you've got the added oxygen as well, right? Because we know if you're flying long haul flights, the oxygen that you're getting while you're flying is not the same, right? So there's that benefit as well.
Yeah. So you'll go from the HBOT into the red light therapy to help the body chill out, get the parasympathetic nervous system in check, but mostly for the circadian support.
Correct.
To help your body get back into the rhythm of this time zone.
Yeah.
And then from there, we would finish on the sauna, the infrared sauna, to get the circulation vasodilation. And if it's early enough of the day and you need to be alert for the rest of the day, do a cold plunge, but don't be too crazy about it. We don't want to send your nervous system into overdrive, but jumping in there real quick can be the amp up that you need to.
And that's really the goal there, is utilizing the cold plunge to kind of like wake you up, right? Early in the morning, I got to get through the rest of this day. I can't overstimulate myself because then I'm going to mess up my sleep tonight, right? So it's about being measured and the timing matters.
Yeah. Okay, cool. We are out of time.
Yeah.
And
we will still to talk about.
Yeah, we'll definitely do this again and again and again. Thank you so much for your time, Shireen.
Yeah.
And we'll
You're
chat
welcome
again soon.
Yeah, chat to you soon.